Okay, Council, we're good to go.
Thank you very much. So I will call this special council meeting to order. We are going to be dealing with draft 2021 operations budget. Colleagues will recall we dealt with the capital budget towards the end of last year. I'd like to let members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of council that they be advised that meetings are broadcast and recorded and made available on the internet. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Do not see any. Thank you. Just before we move on, for reasons I don't understand totally, I'm having some internet problems today, and so I may get frozen on the screen. And Sherry, if you see that I'm stuck with a particular expression on changing on my face, maybe you can just pick it up. And Tanya, you're on the line. If I am having difficulties, I'll send you an email, or should I send it to somebody else?
Sure, that works well. Thank you.
Okay, just trying to be prepared. Okay, so we have no minutes. We have no deputations. Are there any questions, Angie?
No questions.
Okay, we'll go then immediately to our municipal officers and staff reports, which is the taxation budget, which Lane is going to present a. Donna, did you want to say something?
Just don't think Jerry's here.
I thought I saw him there.
Jerry is here. He is also having connectivity issues, so he's been in and out. Looks like he's just left again, but he's probably going to have to operate with his camera off. Sorry, I'm just managing. I think he's sending me an email. One moment.
Okay. Thanks for pointing that out, Donna. Let's just wait for a second and see if we can get him back. Well, I see his name there now. So there he is. Okay. So Jerry, we understand you may need to turn your camera off, but if that's required. So we're all here, and so Jerry, I don't know whether you were online when I asked for declaration of conflict of interest. I'm assuming you have none to declare.
I think he must have lost connectivity again.
Yeah, he's frozen there. Let's give it a minute, colleagues.
Mayor Mitchell, I just spoke to Councillor Heron, and he said if we could just continue without him, he will join as soon as he can.
Okay, thank you. So Lane is going to make a presentation. I believe he has a deck which will come up on the screen. I spoke to Lane briefly. The way we'll do this is as he goes through each section, Lane will pause and ask for questions as we go along for what he's just covered. And so when he says, okay, are there any questions? Please put up your hand. I'll recognize you. We'll ask the question, we'll get the answer. And then when we finish all the questions in that particular section, we'll go on to the next portion. I think, Blaine, that's sort of the way you had indicated you'd like to do it.
That'd be great, Mr. Mayor. That'd be great.
Okay, I will turn it over to you. And I'm assuming you're going to put the deck up on the screen.
That's correct. Let's see if I can get that shared now. And as council is aware, presented quite a few budgets, but this will be the first one on Zoom. Just a question, can you see the slide deck?
I can, it's up on the, you might want to click slideshow
Yep.
version.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to make sure everything was up, and I'll just get going here. So
Perfect.
thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Council for holding this special meeting to consider next steps for our 2021 taxation area rate budget. As we move through the presentation, as Mayor Mitchell outlined, I'll be adding some additional comments and then pausing for questions as we go. I am hoping that this will be as interactive as it has been in other years. It's always a productive experience when we go through and ask questions on this document. I have received some questions of clarification already, but I would encourage any additional questions throughout the presentation. A reminder for everyone on the process to get us to today in our 2021 budget journey, if you will. As all will remember, we did modify our initial timeline due to some scheduling conflicts with the county budget process. And I did want to make note of that extension because taking this into account, and it did indeed kind of enrich our process as we went through. And I may propose this type of timeline in 2022 as we go through that budget process. It's allowed staff to get a much better handle on the year-end numbers. And it has allowed an additional week just to refine and have some discussions with managers and complete the package. We had a couple minor production issues, but I think the actual package itself is better for that extra week. As we work through the presentation today, we'll answer questions about the full package. We do need to receive some direction from Council on outstanding capital projects. And at the end of the presentation, hopefully Council direction to proceed to the next step, which would be formal approval of the budget. So as outlined on the slide here, the 2020 year end is still very much preliminary. We are working through that on a daily basis. We're completing detailed analysis and considering any late invoices that have been received from suppliers related to 2020 and considering the accrual of those back into the 2020 year. And so as is typical at this time of year, the year-end numbers continue to be refined further and further on a daily basis. But I can say that the year-end numbers are very good and they're encouraging. Some examples, for instance, the winter control, which was in deficit in 2019 and essentially used all of our winter control contingency reserve. We finished 2020 with a small surplus that will begin to build that contingency reserve back up again. So that's good news. Likewise, the landfill site is finished with good year-end numbers. And this despite our request at the start of the COVID pandemic to defer trips to the landfill site and specifically to defer brush, but that operations center definitely responded well once we were able to open things up a bit. And of course, the financials include the council-approved community support program. I'll touch on those in the next slide with respect to how we utilize the Safe Restart grant. In addition, council will recall that annually our auditor presents and notes a number of unfunded liabilities. One of them has been over the years vacation pay that we couldn't take. I'm pleased to report that with the new payroll system, not only have we been able to fully implement an accrual system for our vacation pay, but we also were able to fully fund it in 2020. And as a last comment, the building and planning department had great activity in 2020 rather, and that included providing over $55,000 worth of permits that were funded through the council community support program. On to the Safe Restart grant. Selwyn received an initial allocation of about $528,000. An additional application was submitted and wherein we requested additional financial support from the province, and we were awarded an additional $338,000. That was comprised of two amounts, $232,000 for 2020 and $106,000 for 2021. And with respect to that grant, it was basically provided to us so that it would make us whole at the end of the year. And anything that was left over would be carried on to the 2020 year. 2021 year, excuse me. I have utilized the majority of the funding for 2020 to cover direct costs of the COVID-19 response, the community support program, and lost revenues in all departments that are directly tax supported. Provincial funding has allowed us to close the year 2020 in good shape with no deficits save and except the arenas. And of course, these deficits were expected, but they are indeed greater than we had expected. Has been our practice over the years, the final deficits will be identified on our consolidated financial statement. They'll be carried forward into 2021 and then cleared using the unconditional grant, which is still available to municipalities in Ontario. I think that this is a good point to review some good, interesting information about the arenas, especially given the late start in the fall. I know the council is interested in the impact of the later start and specifically the impact on hydro. And so Mike is available to share some information. I think this information will be helpful in municipalities making the case to the OHF and the OMHA governing bodies when the leagues do start up. And so I do believe that Mike is on the line. And if Mike is on the line, he can maybe share some information with council with respect to hydro and the arenas.
Right? You there, Mike?
Sorry, I think I unmuted and was unmuted by the moderator, so my apologies. Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay, excellent. I know there's been questions over, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there's been questions about what our operational savings could be for quite a few years if we just didn't open in the summertime, because it definitely has a hydro effect, but it also has a staffing effect and a natural gas effect. Looking through the numbers very quickly, because obviously with Hydro One and PUS, we don't always get the bills in right away, but we had enough information to do a very quick overview on the effect. And if we use Ennismore as a comparator, we typically put the ice in around the 2nd to the 5th of September, in that time frame, with the plant being started 10 days before that. So end of the 2nd or 3rd week of August, we would normally start it in the arena that we were opening first. This year, we didn't start the plant until plants, because we started on the same day, September 23rd. Then we started ice operations at the start of October. So if we look at the consumption in Ennismore, for example, in 2019, the startup month, we used around 73,000 kilowatts and dollars and cents is really very relative to what the rate is at that time. So it's better for us to talk about kilowatts than it is to talk about the actual dollars, because then if we compare October in 2020, we only used 54,000 kilowatts. So you're a significant reduction, almost 1/3 reduction in cost of electricity to put it in by putting it in a colder month. The PUS one is a little harder because they don't bill at the end of the month. They bill a little differently. So it's not quite as startling a difference, 33%, but it's over 15% reduction in electrical consumption, just because we started. There is no other difference as far as consumption goes, other than the fact that it was considerably colder outside and that much less stress on the building. One thing that is noteworthy on there is that although if you look at the overall number for Ennismore versus Lakefield, Lakefield is less expensive to run from the use of electricity, but it's less efficient than Ennismore. So whether it's because of the age of the building or the insulation and the work that was done, by not starting early, Ennismore benefited more from a percentage wise of efficiency, but both saw a significant benefit. Staffing is the other number that we'd really like to be able to examine, but this year of all years, that's impossible to do because of all the changes. You know, we had no staff, and then we went straight to having to have 2.5 to 3 times the staff to be able to sanitize in the short period. So Lane is correct in taking the electrical consumption as sort of the best barometer for what we knew to be true is actually proven to be true in that 20 to 33% range of efficiency. So we've been pushing fairly hard to the OMHA and the OHF and the OWHA, the 3 governing bodies of Ontario Hockey. And we're going to do a comparator with the other arenas because we all started late, and really push forward with the further appeal for the small centers to start hockey in October, not September.
Thanks, Mike. I see Donna has a question.
Yes, thank you. Through you to Mike. Mike, this is maybe not the time to ask because I'm thinking it's way on in the budget binder, but it seems to me, if going by memory, that the deficit in Ennismore was 77,000 and something like 112,000 in Smith Lakefield. Is that correct? The total deficit? Or have I got them mixed up?
This is for 2020 or 2019?
No, it must have been for 2020. It's in the back part of the binder.
It is coming later, so I think we'll have to rely. I don't want to guess at that number either. So I think it's best if we wait until we get to that number, if that's okay with you.
Okay, but is it correct that Ennismore did have a way lower deficit than Smith Lakefield or Lakefield Smith? Or do you remember?
I don't remember. Yeah.
All right, that's fine.
We'll be addressing that a little later in the agenda, Donna.
Absolutely, yes.
But I just thought he might know, and he might know the answer why.
So we'll ask that question. Okay. Does anybody else have a question? I only have a few boxes, so I have Donna and I have Anita. I can't see Sherry at this moment. So Sherry.
I do, Andy.
Oh, Jerry, you're here too. Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, kilowatt hours, that's all fine and dandy, but the billing cycle should still remain the same. So if we take a look at our bills from September and October from last year, or sorry, 2019 to 2020, we should be able to figure out some kind of number, could we not, just on the hydro portion, not the wages and all that jazz. What's that number between the bills?
Well, if I just look at the 2 bills in front of me here, one's $15,000, the other one is $11,000. So, you know, there's a 30% savings, but it isn't like, it's not the same rate as last year. So the rate went up. So it's actually better than that, right?
Okay, so if it's better than that, would you, compared to the 2 rates where it went up, would you say it's a $6,000 saving by opening in October, or, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10? Let me know when I get close. 11, 12, 13.
No. It wouldn't be over 6 because it didn't go up 1.5%. It probably went up about I'd have to look at the actual, go back to the actual bill, but it did go up by about 7.5%, 8%, if I remember correctly. So that would take it to something in the, an extra $1,000 on that bill.
So it's fair to say just the electricity cost between opening in September or October versus an opening in September, just electricity is fair to say around $5,000 to $6,000 savings.
I wouldn't be uncomfortable with using that number when we compare it with the other Mattergies. And of course, whenever you take 1 year, you're so dependent on what the weather was like that particular year. But it's a similar, when I look at 2018 and 2019, it's a similar usage reduction. We were 66,000 starting late in 2018 at Ennismore, and as I said, it's 73 if we're talking usage. So at the end of the year, if we can take the biggest bill, that's always the biggest bill is the month we put it in. Whether it's 15,000 or in the year we started late, 2018, it was 11,500. If we can reduce that by 20-30%, there's a significant difference. And if we can make it 30%, which is what the difference is on this one, then yeah, that's a significant savings. And that's only one portion of what the overall operating costs are of putting our ice in and switching from summer mode, parks mode, to winter mode of arena mode.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Sherry just mentioned she didn't have a question on this particular issue. Donna, you had yours. Anita, anything? No? Okay. So carry on. I guess we're back to Lane.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So thanks for that information, Mike. Obviously, maybe some further analysis there, but it's definitely good information to build our case and present to the governing bodies. The overview we've provided so far and that update on the arenas, that kind of sets the context for today's discussion, and kind of switching gears from the 2020 year over into 2021. So one of the my screen is just frozen up here for a second. So there we go. One of the key factors, of course, when we set our budget is assessment and new growth. And as I updated council before, we did have some true growth in 2020. It was just a little less than what we typically would have received. So there's definitely a number of detailed spreadsheets that are included in the package that have outlined where the assessment growth occurred. I think of real importance to our municipality is that whatever tax policy is put in place, whatever we do with respect to the budget, on the summary sheet, it's outlined that 91% of our assessment is residential properties. And so the impact on the ratepayer and the residents needs to always be top of mind. Of course, the 80.86% increase that we did see in real growth, MPAC did have a concerted effort to get that assessment in place before the end of the year, and appreciate that. But the province-wide reassessment was delayed due to COVID. Overall, though, we did have a seminar just recently, and work at MPAC does continue so that they are prepared to answer some of these questions for the province about when the reassessment will commence. And with, of course, a very active real estate market, I would definitely like to minimize any delays and move ahead with the next province-wide reassessment. Not just because of the increase in assessment, because we always take that into account when we set our budget, but more so that the CVA does not become too far out of date. We're using a date right now, which is January 1st of 2012. So with the real estate market the way it is, it'd be nice to get the new value in place and then to begin that phase-in period which is a 4-year phase-in. Just a reminder as well with respect to the education rates, because we didn't do a province-wide reassessment, the uniform residential rate will stay the same in 2021 at 0.88%. And these rates are set across the province.
I think Sherry has a question about that.
Yes, I do, through you. Elaine, with the inspections by MPAC pause because of COVID, do you have a sense as to how far behind we are with the new taxes that would be coming in?
Well, as I mentioned, I was really pleased that MPAC did put a concerted effort in the last quarter. And so I do know that some of our more active subdivisions and condominium developments, we had specifically pointed out some of the areas in the township that were seeing rapid growth, and they concentrated in those areas. And so an area that would be very close to the deputy mayor's heart, to the Lilac subdivision, we definitely had MPAC do some reassessments up there. And based on our supplementaries that we have received to date, that area definitely was captured for the most part. One or two of our larger commercial developments was definitely captured in supplementary assessment. So I have a good feeling that they did hit the kind of the large variances in assessment. I think where we will see more assessment come in, but at a later date, are those renovations, where they really need to get out on site and do some of those reviews. So I think that's where we may have some hidden assessment that may surprise us. But I think the large areas that we would expect to see those assessments did indeed come through.
Thank you.
Any other questions on assessment? Not seeing any.
I think Donna had a question, Mayor Mitchell.
Okay, this is going to be challenging because of anyways, go ahead, Donna.
Okay. Through you to Lane, I think you answered the greatest portion of my question when you were speaking with Sherry, because you mentioned that some assessments, they have to actually go out on site. And I could see that would be a problem with COVID. But a place like Lilacs, would they do a desktop assessment of that? Because it's pretty specific what the residences look like. Is that the difference, that they'd be able to do Lilac and not some of the other places?
To you, Mayor Mitchell, I think, while that could be the case that they would do a desktop, I do know that when that assessment came through, they were actually out in the field because they were in our office. And so that was after September and before the shutdown in December. So they were doing that work in the last quarter of the year. So they were actually out and about in the community. I understand the comment there with respect to maybe some of the models and uniformity and different things like that, but I really can't speak to how they do that. That is definitely a part of their modeling, but the assessment that I was talking about is actually having MPAC out in the field doing that work, and they did do an exemplary job by last quarter.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's Anita. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, this is with regards to, so the last paragraph on your assessment highlights overview in the binder. It talks about in 2020, council approved the use of the additional true growth to mitigate municipal tax and impact specifically in another first responder cost center, the fire service, and that in 2021, these additional revenues will help to mitigate the impacts of increased tax levy requirements. I'm assuming that's going to be covered a little bit further in your presentation.
I can speak to that now. Actually, it might make sense at this juncture with assessment. Definitely in one of the assessment spreadsheets, we talk about true growth and those impacts. So the true growth based on the 0.86% was just a little over $67,000. And then when you take into account that true growth impact on the area rates for policing and add that in based on a similar percentage, that number is a little over 24,000. So when council looks to the impacts tab and sees us reducing the gross tax levy by about $91,500, that's the true gross figure. So it's about 91,449 based on our estimates at that point. So we definitely were making use of that true growth to mitigate any of the cost of expenditure increases in 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Okay, Lane, off, upwards and onwards.
Okay, so so we talked about assessment there a little bit. As a rule of thumb, this slide is always very telling when you consider the increases in expenditures that the municipality faces on an annual basis. And it does get adjusted annually based on the expenditures at hand, the assessment at hand. So this relates back to my comments that I have made in the past with respect to what is 3%. In 3% definitely is one of those areas that people want to chat about a lot, but we have to basically pay the bills with dollars. And so in 2021, approximately $75,000 equals a 1% increase in the levy here. So as you can see, there's not a lot of room for increased spending. So I would just say generally this is a good number to keep in mind when we're faced with either new spending pressures or when we're considering new annual programs or impacts of policy changes. So this is a number that does come up on an annual basis, and it's a good number to keep in mind for sure.
Okay, any questions on that? Not seeing any. Okay, grants and other funding. Go ahead, Blaine.
Okay, so while assessment yields taxes, the township's also very fortunate to receive a variety of provincial and federal grants. And the narrative in the budget binder outlines the whole span of provincial grants that we receive either annually or we have received in the last year or two and are fortunate to, or some other grants that are in the works. I did want to pass along special thanks to Angie and Megan for the work done to put those narratives together. As council would be aware, Megan is kind of our grant specialist here on staff. I was really quite pleased to turn that role over to Megan when she started. She's great at it. She really knows how to reach out to the people involved in the grant programs, get the salient points down on paper and move ahead. And she's got a great track record there. So for Angie and Megan to put these narratives together, it made sense and they did a great job. We have enjoyed really solid financial support from the province over the last few years, and once again heading into 2021. So just touch on a few of them. The UMP grant, it's by far our largest unconditional funding program at a little over $1 million. In 2021, that's up $13,900. And it's really great to see the current provincial government keeping that program in place. I know that a lot of municipalities rely on it. Once again, we're using it to clear our arena deficits. It's an unconditional grant, so we're able to do that. But we have really kind of stuck to our rule of using it for capital programs or one-time funding programs. This year, again, we're augmenting our reserve contribution for the roads equipment. And of course, we've earmarked some funds there for the Water Street project, which when we get the final design completed on that will be a multi-year project and worth a lot of money. So I'm definitely trying to put together a good funding package starting now before we even have the final design done. The OCEF grant also staying in place for 2021. That's actually the same funding level as last year, but it's great to have that in place. And of course, that was just recently announced by our local MPP. And I think some of our folks were available at that announcement as well. OCEF is available to fund a series of eligible infrastructure projects. So while it's not totally unconditional, they do provide a fairly broad range of infrastructure projects, and that's to be based on asset management plans. Some of the most recent use of those funds was for the stormwater management work that was completed last year and is carrying over into this year. Last year, we identified structures and conditions, and this year we'll be doing camera work flushing commencing in the spring. And of course, funds are available there as well to finalize our asset management plan if the July deadline is maintained by the province. And so basically, once we get through our budget process here and audits, the staff will be turning their minds to getting some information before council to talk about the impending asset management plan. One of the other grants, of course, we can't forget about, even though we have consumed a large part of it in 2020, is the modernization grant in support of technology and customer service and kind of outreach to the community using technology. We received the initial allocation there of almost $630,000. That's funded our initial investments in a number of areas: financial services, software, the project coordination itself, and a number of other instances where we've reached out to the public through the internet. Of the remaining amount, approximately, I think of that 127, I would estimate about 100,000 remains uncommitted and therefore available to fund some of our new technology recommendations coming out of the various service delivery reviews that we received last year. And I should mention that that as well was another provincial grant that allowed us to move forward. And as well, there was recently a new application-based stream under this program announced. And so expressions of interest will be due by March 15th to get that in place. And council can look forward to receiving a report from the management team on that, and maybe where other areas of grant funding could support improved customer service or efficiencies with the municipality. And finally, just before I move on from this slide, the COVID resiliency grant, that was an allocation-based grant, about $100,000. We did submit an application afterwards related to the front entrance improvements at 1310 Center Line here. And we are awaiting word back on that. So that's something that would need to take place in 2021, but we have not yet heard back on that. That's the provincial grants.
Okay, and Sherry has a question about that.
Thank you, through you. Going back to the RED grant, part of the money that we have in this budget package would be used for renovations to the former Scout building. If that was not approved, could the money be used elsewhere?
And Angie may be the best person to talk about the relationship that we have with the RED representatives, but they have been very good to work with. They definitely have approved the deferral from last year's project over. And I guess the point I would make from a financial perspective before I turn it over to Angie would be our RED funding for that project is about $30,000, but in order to receive the full 30,000, we need to spend 80. So it's a cost sharing. So it isn't 100% funding. So we would have to spend about 80 on that project to receive 30. And just not sure if Angie would like to add any additional comments on that RED funding program.
Thank you, Lane. Yes, so Sherry, we have been successful in working with RED when we've needed to make a change. So if council decided they didn't want to do the Scout building, the best we could do would be to pitch another idea to them. I don't know, I can't say if we'd be successful, but we'd make that effort.
Okay. Is it specifically for a certain upgrade?
It would have to meet whatever the RED requirements are for the grant. So typically, they're looking for economic benefits or community benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if there are no further questions on the provincial grants, I'll just move on to the next slide, which is switching over to our federal partner. And as I mentioned every year, this is one of our sources of really stable funding provided by the federal government. It's administered by AMO, and that's the federal gas tax. They have actually expanded some of the eligible projects over the years for the federal gas tax. So calling it a gas tax may be a bit of a misnomer, but based on our allocation this year, it's over $540,000, an increase of $23,525. I will remind council that we had received a one-time injection of funding as well 2 years ago. So a similar amount that council at that time provided direction on, and we set it aside for Water Street and for additional resurfacing work. And Rick and his guys have definitely been out making use of those funds and improving the road resurfacing projects in the township. I guess in terms of federal grants, of course, maybe we could say that we're looking at the light at the end of the tunnel for COVID-19 and the pandemic, and I remain hopeful that maybe a federal stimulus package would be available in 2022. I kind of have two minds on a stimulus package. In one instance, it can drive up costs locally because there's only so many contractors, but at the same time, it does kickstart the economy and get things moving. And so I think we would be able to make use of our planning that's went into asset management to be prepared. And if some new funding does come along, we just need to ensure that we're prepared and nimble enough to take advantage of that. This kind of wraps up the, sorry, was there a question?
Oh, I was just asking if there were any questions. I don't see any.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, this definitely wraps up the highlights section of the grants tab.
Okay, I think we're good to go.
Okay, we'll just move over to the capital purchases and projects section, our capital investments that we make in the community. Of course, as Mayor Mitchell outlined, we did meet for a specific meeting on this in the fall of 2020 to map out a capital program for 2021. The budget package outlining, we still are doing our 2020 year end, but the impact here on budgets with respect to capital relate to continuation projects. So projects that we worked on in late into the fall and then carry over. So the 15th line would be a good example of that, where Rick's guys got quite a bit of work done there, but we still have the resurfacing aspect of that job, kind of the finish part carrying over into 2021. I circulated an updated spreadsheet on that ties into the budget document, and it's a summary all on one page. We find that helpful, and kind of just to look in one spot and to be able to identify everything. So since we talked about it, capital in the fall, we've got a few projects that we needed to add. So as I mentioned, we updated some projects, but also a good example of a project being added would be the roads equipment. So we had a truck that was ordered well back in last February. The truck itself has been purchased, but the center body attachment, plow attachment, all those things have been delayed, probably given the environment that we're working in right now. So Rick's latest information from the suppliers that truck may be received by the end of February. So that project's already been approved by council. It's already been ordered. We're just waiting for it. So the expenditure, because it hasn't arrived on site yet, will be in the 2021 budget. We also updated the sheet this year, and may have been Deputy Mayor Semis's suggestion that any projects that are carrying over or continuation, those types of things, we should somehow earmark that, just so that we can very quickly take a look at that and see, where that is the case. And so we put that in place this year, and there's just a new column outlines if it's a continuation, if it's maybe pending approval, it's a carryover, if something's been deferred. So we've added that to the sheet as well. So we're seeing approximately $2.5 million in capital investments this year. A couple of points, just finer points, I guess, looking through the budget document. We have our capital worksheets where we outline dollar values. And so the Water Street design was outlined at approximately $70,000. But if folks look on the sheet, the number's closer to $45,000. So that difference really is offset through funding that will be coming through from our water and sewer utilities as well. So we treat water and sewer at a different time of the year, but we look at the whole project. So we put that together. They'll come forward as part of those projects. And I guess maybe one of the larger projects that is still has been put in abeyance or is deferred until this meeting is the Scout building. Just so before I move on to that slide, I guess I would say, are there any other questions about the capital budget worksheet? And then we'll move on to the Scout building discussion.
Any questions, colleagues? Don't see any, Wayne.
Okay, so we'll just move over then to the Scout building. The tender closed about 60 days ago. So it was deferred late in the fall, presented to the first council meeting in the new year, and actually, as outlined in the package, the bids on that actually expired today. So staff have provided a few reports on the project. And also, I guess we discussed quite a bit at the last council meeting, the impacts that it has on some of the other planned projects as well. So that was discussed at length at that meeting. I would say council knows my thoughts on the project, the impact of the other projects. I wanted to thank Scott Warren. We just did a lot of work on the project to try to get additional information and answer some of the questions on a project that definitely grew in scope and moved on. I did notice that I guess after the fact at the last meeting, I didn't really provide Mike a lot of opportunity to talk to the project. Of course, Mike's department will be responsible overall, and would be really closely involved with this project if it moved ahead. So if council will bear with me, I just would maybe ask Mike if he had any additional comments to provide before council debates this matter.
Mike?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few points, I guess. One of the things certainly is that Scott has done great work and has spoken to the contractor. Well, I know that their bid would expire today, but I'm sure we could talk to them if we needed a few more days. But being able to keep my full-time staff, as you know, as Jerry had updated you, all of our part-time and contract staff have been laid off, but depending on whether we open the arenas or not will certainly determine the fate of the rest of the department. And we've been doing a great job of doing work at the public works buildings and at the fire halls and at the seniors buildings. The floors and whatnot that haven't been done in a couple decades now are in great shape. But certainly the Scout building and be able to do demolition for the kitchen and bathroom or something my staff can do. We've had an assessment done by Cambian, and there's about a $5,000 to $6,000 savings if we did that ourselves, if we did that in-house, and it would take a couple weeks for us to do that. So it would keep our full-time staff or would provide another job for our full-time staff to do while we're in a lockdown. There are certainly some other potential savings, but whether it's looking at a slightly different type of steel, as you guys were made well aware the last meeting, or some alterations like that as Lane went through. Materials is the unknown. We certainly don't know with wood or with metal what's going to happen, but we do know that they're fairly high right now. But prices rarely come down. Once they go up, gas might be the exception. But the other thing is, I have been contacted by the Celtic or the Dragon and Ferry organizers and by the Jazz Festival, and in both cases they've asked me. Most recently, the Jazz Festival, who has confirmed that they are canceled for this year. But their question by their president was, "Boy, I sure hope they're going to put bathrooms in the Scout building. I see that it's up for potentially being renovated." And I assured them that was part of the plan if it does go ahead. But it is absolutely something that would be a huge benefit. And as far as timing goes, because we wouldn't interfere with the 2021 schedule of things like the Jazz Festival, the timing would be very good for that perspective. So I know that ultimately we'll follow the direction of council, but to not interfere with any of the summer events and allowing it to be upgraded after almost 40 years of not having an upgrade, I think would be very valuable.
Thank you, Mike. So, council, somebody going to intervene? Jerry?
Thank you. Through you, Lane or Michael, what is the start to finish timeline to have that building completed now? And then I'll follow up with a couple more, Andy.
Mike, timeline?
I actually probably have to defer that to Lane, because I think he's got the bids.
Okay, through Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so I don't have the updated schedule because of the spring start, but it would be a spring start essentially as soon as possible. It would be completed by before the winter of this year. So it would basically stretch from spring through summertime and close up in the fall.
Be the 2021 building season. Okay. I see it, Donna. Jerry had a couple others, and I'll get to everybody. Not to worry. So Jerry, you had another question?
Thank you, through you. So basically a 6-month build on that building is what we're saying?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I would really need to meet with, we haven't had a pre-construction meeting, obviously, because we haven't awarded anything. The thing that's going to slow us down a little bit at the start is the foundation work. So as Mike had mentioned, if we can get in at this point in time and maybe do some of the preliminary demolition, but we need to be able to do the foundation work and get that stuff all under control first, right? But
all right.
I don't have a current schedule based on a spring start.
Sure.
Okay, the other question
Okay.
then from,
I'm just going to let Jerry ask his questions. I'm going to get to everybody. Don't worry. I will get to everybody. Jerry.
thank you, sir. So basically, to Michael there, we've got a $5,000 to $6,000 saving on our resources doing the work. If they weren't doing that work, would you have something else pressing for them to do?
Right now, through you, Mr. Mayor, right now, we're going through all the other buildings, and the answer is we are going through the work. They're doing a great job, but we don't have a lot more. If we don't reopen on February the 11th, I can't see how we would be able to avoid further layoffs of full-time staff, especially if we don't have, here's 2 weeks worth of work, which would take us into March. Without the Scout building, without the arenas reopening, it would be very difficult to avoid further layoffs.
All right, thank you, and I'll yield to my colleagues.
Okay, so I saw Donna first, then Anita. Donna and then Anita.
Thank you very much. Through you to Mike. So getting back to this, I think council's problem, really, we don't disagree that it's not a good project. It's just the fact that it's so expensive. And so the 5,000 to 6,000, if we did it with our own resources to demolish, that would be taken off the RFP that already exists. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe Scott has touched base with them. Well, I know Scott has touched base with them and has gotten in writing that we could do that through our own forces. And because they broke it down by category: mechanical, electrical, demolition. Demolition had a quote, I believe, on the low bid of between $10,000 and $11,000.
I have another question. Mike mentioned a different type of steel that would reduce the cost. Could you elaborate on that?
It was it's what Lane was talking about at the previous meeting, where it's a type of roof. So there's 2 different types of roof finish, and I don't remember the exact number in the difference, but it was Lane, I can look it up, or if you know off the top of your head what that difference was, but it was at the previous meeting. It was one of the 3 numbers that Lane had brought forward when we talked about reduction of siding cost, reduction of roofing cost.
I can weigh in there a little bit, Mr. Mayor, and well, we do have to be a little cautious about talking too much in detail with essentially an open bid that's not been awarded. with respect to competitive advantage and things like that. But the steel roof would be changing the steel roof from a standing seam roof, which we have used on the majority of our buildings and hides the fasteners, to more of a steel roof that you may see on other residential buildings, but say the library in Ennismore would have a steel roof that still has, you see the fasteners. So that would be something that, is in a lot of facilities provided by, for instance, locally, Havelock Metal could provide something like that. So the difference really is that it's a different profile, and the standing seam roof is seen to maybe last longer because all the fasteners are hidden.
A follow up to that. I thought all steel roofs had a lifetime guarantee. So if we went with this type, it wouldn't be a lifetime guarantee. Is that what you're indicating? Because the fasteners are exposed?
Well, yeah, I have to be honest and say I've never seen a lifetime guarantee that actually holds up for anything. So I put steel on my building, and I'm hoping that I see it for my lifetime. But yeah, I know that there are 25-year shingles that I've replaced in 10 as well. So I don't really hold a lot of stock in that.
I personally, it'd be nice to know the difference in price between these two different steel roofs. If it's like an insignificant amount, it wouldn't be worth it. But if it's a significant amount, it might be. And then I just have one other comment. In the grant section, I highlighted it where it was written, the township needs to be mindful that funding is likely to change in the future, and as such, planning for capital and one-time financing may need to be amended. So there's a lot of money going into this project from I think 2020 and 2021. So that's another concern of mine. And I still want to reiterate that it would be a nice addition to the property over there by the community center and so on, but just the amount of money with these challenging times makes me a little concerned.
Thank you, Donna. Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of touch on the fact that it seems like an awful lot of money. I did some quick calculations. So at 1,625 square feet for a reno, and I understand about the foundation and the various others, the expanded scope. But even at 441,000, that's $270 a square foot for a renovation. And, that's, I understand that the police probably need a bit of a more secure section of the building, and which makes perfect sense. But I just, $270 a square foot for a renovation as opposed to, going with a straight brand new build. And I don't know that you have actual costs to put on a new building as opposed to renovating the current building.
To Mr. Mayor, we did touch on that a little bit at the last meeting. We definitely don't have anything fully designed, of course, because we haven't received really any direction to do anything further on the project. Concern always with a brand new build, right, is that we have some opportunity cost already lost. So we would have the design costs. We would have to basically forego those. We had demolition costs, which we would have to add to the project. And while we could probably do some of that with our own forces, we would have demolition costs. And then the concern always with a new build is scope creep. And as Mike has mentioned, we have support from the community for this building, but when all of a sudden you start building a new building, then all of a sudden other challenges, other opportunities, other requests come forward. And so the concern is that all of a sudden you're not dealing with a building that's 1,600 square feet, it gets larger. So those would be my comments on that.
I'm going to intervene and ask a question. So just to make sure that I understand correct. So we've got a budget there, $441,000 to do it. Council clearly is concerned with that amount. The funding for that, if I understand correctly, is about $24,000 from RED, $242,000 from OMF, and $174,000 from our reserves. The reality is, all of that, with the exception of the $24,000 for the RED, the money that is designated from OMF and the money that's designated from reserves, if council were to say something like, you know what, it's a good project, we'd like to see it somewhat smaller in scope. We'd like to take some more time to figure out exactly how we want to do this so that it comes in at what I think is a lower cost. If we were to defer this, not cancel the project, but defer it for a year, the majority of the money that we've set aside will still be there next year. Because you can take that portion, you can put it in reserves. You're already planning to draw some additional amount from reserves. So in terms from a budgetary standpoint, a deferral for a year doesn't put in jeopardy the funding, because we just simply park it in reserves as we try to work through a different way to do it. In terms of the $24,000, which I understand would have to be for renovations to make washrooms accessible, I don't know if it's possible, but transferring that money and some of the OMF money to provide accessible washrooms with the washroom facility that is currently there at the arena. It's about 150 feet further away. I get that, but that might be a manner in which we don't jeopardize the grant. So if we were to make the decision to defer it, the majority of the money would still be there. And it is possible to find a way of rescuing, for lack of a better word, the RED funding to do washroom work there. I don't know if that makes any sense. It does to me, but that doesn't mean that it does to everybody else, or whether it's possible. And so maybe you can answer that, and then, or Sherry, did you want to add on to that point first?
Thank you. Through you, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. It would be an opportune time to do the work, given the festivals being canceled. It wouldn't be taking away from anything else going on in that park if we were to go ahead with it. And there's no guarantee that the building costs are going to go down next year. If we wait, maybe they'll go up. We don't know. Is there a way that we can go out with an RFP and see if we can shave some of the money off of, get back to where we were prior to the additional funding that we're being asked for, and go that route? So I'm posing the opposite.
Okay, so there are two different suggestions out there for Elaine to talk to. One is to retender, to try to come in closer to the original 250, I think it was, which would require some of the work that's scheduled to be done not to be done. So that's one approach. The other approach is to defer it until and tender it next year, to give us some time to try to figure out how we can get a tender together that would be less expensive. Sherry and I are essentially saying the same thing. In Sherry's option, we do it this year. In my option, I'm suggesting we can put it off to next year. If we can get it down to that amount and do it this year, fine. It's the quantum that is the concern. And if there's a way to get that down this year, that's great. I was just trying to suggest something if we need to defer it for a year in order to do the work to get it down. Anyways, those are really the two options. And Lane, did you want to weigh in on that, or Mike? Or?
Sure. Okay. So based on those two kind of scenarios, definitely with respect to the first that was proposed, yes, those amounts from UMP and the amounts they can just go into reserve, the amounts that are in reserve can stay, and we can look at doing something next year. That defers the the project itself that defers, we would have to have some discussion about the impact on the other projects. But that's, I'll try to just park that for now. That's one. With respect to retendering, trying to get closer to that other number, of course, right off the bat, that means we can't just retender with what we have. We would have to rework the design, omit some things. I can say with respect to the steel costs and the roof, we're not saving $20,000 or $30,000 on that. We're saving thousands of dollars, not tens of thousands. And I guess I would just outline that the bid that we're looking at is the bid that met the requirements. Out of the other 7 bids, it started at $414 and went as high as $578,000. So from $414 to $578 is a large span. So to think that we are just going to, I think, save $150,000, I don't think we're going to do that in this environment that we're in, and we're going to have to dramatically change the design of the building to come anywhere close to that, which means we have to go back to the architect and essentially say, what do we start taking off here? Right? And then, as council's aware, when you start designing things, then everything has an impact on something else, right? So I don't have a magic answer for it, but either one of these options has merit, and I think the key point is that even with a deferral to next year, we would need to actually provide response back to all of our bidders to basically say all bids are rejected at this point in time.
Donna, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Getting back to the washrooms in the community center that have the exterior access, if we were able to transfer the $24,000 of RED to do something with those, even when we do the Scout building, let's say it's next year for a hypothetical phrase, would we still be using those externally accessed washrooms in the community center? So what I'm saying is, if we did put money into it this year and improve those, if we got a approval from RED, that money would not be wasted. We would still be using those washrooms, is my question. Would we still be using those washrooms once the Scout building is complete?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I definitely let Mike weigh in on this. We did talk about possibly using those RED funds across the way. And I haven't been there just recently, but as Mike outlined to me, space is definitely an issue there, and especially when you talk about the need for fully accessible washrooms. But I'll let Mike weigh in on that.
Yes, through you. Thank you, Lane. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We would have to build into the lobbies in order, especially in the women's washroom of the arena, to make them fully accessible. We would have to bring an architect in there and get full measurements and everything. But what's there right now is definitely not going to meet the 2025 fully accessible codes with the turning radiuses. If we were trying to do, we would lose at least one stall in the women's, and we would have to build out into the lobby area. They are certainly not ideal. Anything can be done. So we could certainly start looking at it and see if that's possible. The other option is, if in fullness of time, the Scout building is going to be a multi-use facility, the bathroom portion could be the only thing that gets started this year. If it was possible to look at the contractor, because if we're looking at a change, we don't necessarily need to look at a change in location. We can look at a change in scope there, instead of trying to open up the washrooms every year in the arena, which is a possibility. We could look at doing the renovations in the Scout building for the washrooms only, and then they would become the new outdoor washrooms with much better access, which obviously with more accessibility and with much greater proximity for any events that are held in the Isabel Morris Park.
Donna, on the same point? Yeah.
Yes, it is. So if we did just do the washrooms in the Scout building, that wouldn't impact the roof or the foundation or anything like that? Would they,
Well, they
are
would-
they more standalone?
They wouldn't get done, and we'd have to confirm that all that is possible. That question hasn't been asked of any of the contractors, but if we're going to be asking about a contractor about the potential of doing work in the arena washrooms, we should explore everything unless there's no appetite whatsoever in looking at the Scout building as a rebuild versus a new construction, tear down new construction. Because if that's even a possibility, then making alterations to that building isn't great. But no, there would be no improvement on the roof or the siding. It would really just be the door that you'd probably change out, and then the windows in there.
But
Jerry?
it wouldn't impact further construction on the Scout building, or maybe you don't know, you're not a
Well, no, I'm not, but there are other access doors to get in there and do your work. Like you're not bound by one door only. There's a door where the garage is, there's a door on the other side, and there's one on the parking lot side. So there should be access to do them separately in the future if that's the way we were gonna go. But all of this would have to be looked at the same time as looking at if the project as it stands doesn't get approved today, then we would have to come back to council afterwards if we were directed to look at the arena option and at any other options.
Just one more thing.
Yes.
If we didn't make the arena washrooms accessible, we still have until 2025 to provide accessible washrooms. And I would hope that we would be able to do that at the Scout building by then. But those arena washrooms, I think they are still very useful to people. They're closer to the marina, and $24,000 spent in there would make them way more pleasant. So I wouldn't have a problem with spending some money in those washrooms, even though we wouldn't be making them accessible, just keeping them the same size. And I wouldn't be adverse if we could do the washrooms in the Scout building and defer the rest of the project either.
Sorry,
Thanks,
one important point of clarification. I hate to cut off. They are accessible with the current day's code right now. So it's not like we don't have accessible washrooms in there. There is a stall in each of the men's and the women's that meet current code right now. They do need work, and they would need to get to the 2025 code. They would need to be redesigned. So you're correct in that the money wouldn't be wasted.
Okay, Jerry, and then Anita.
Thank you, through you. So I know I was concerned about the cost at our last meeting, but if we were to split this project up, now you've got to pay setup costs twice because they're coming in and doing part of it then, they're doing part of it down the road. And who's to say you're going to get the new contractor or the same contractor bid on both ends of it if we were to split it? So what I'm suggesting is you might not get the whole project for $414. You might get it for $250 for part of it, and then you might spend another $250 depending if the original winner of the tender got the project. So what I would suggest as well is if we defer it for the year, who's to say the low guy doesn't come back again and we end up paying over $500 depending on who applies. So at this point, I would put forth the motion that we accept it as is, with the caveat that we do our own demolition and we do use our own resources for that demolition. And that works twofold. It keeps a couple guys employed, which we do have an obligation to try and get as much work for our full-time employees. It only benefits us in the long run for, they don't go somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. So I would like to put that forward if I can get a seconder.
Seconder, Sherry, Anita, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, I wanted to comment on the idea of using that red funding to work on accessible washrooms in the Scout building, at least for the, the park is used a lot. I know there's the Jazz Festival is already canceled for 2021. And some probably Canada, I haven't heard yet, but I'm going to assume Canada Day is also canceled, but hopefully fingers crossed. But there is quite a bit of activity with the skate park and everything. I think it would be helpful to have at least accessible washrooms in that Scout building at the present time.
Donna?
So we actually have a motion move, but it sounds like Anita is really just looking at partial project. And I don't know, is that correct, Anita? The washrooms? That's really what I would be looking at too. So I guess we'd have to have a recorded vote.
Okay, so the motion from Jerry is to proceed with the current bid, lowering the price by doing a portion of the work as described by our own from our own resources, from our own staff. So the price would come in under 414, somewhere under 414. Right, so that's the motion on the floor, right? And it's duly seconded by Jerry. Moved by Jerry, seconded by Sherry, and Donna's requested a recorded division. Okay, Madam Clerk.
Okay. Yeah, yes, thank you. Deputy Mayor Sherry Sennis,
Yes.
Councillor Ballantyne,
No.
Councillor Heron,
Yes.
Councillor Locke,
No,
Mayor Mitchell.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Okay, colleagues, we're about an hour and a half into this, so let's take a 10-minute break and we'll be back.
Mayor Mitchell, are you able to view all of your colleagues now?
Yep, your instructions took me a little while, but I figured them out.
Perfect.
I don't know where I am.
You are right on my left-hand column in the middle. I can see you. Can you see everybody, Donna? Donna, can you see everybody? Mute it right now.
3 people, you, Anita, and myself.
Okay, so if you go to, and Tanya, help me with this if I did say it wrong. If you go up to the upper right-hand corner of your screen.
Of my little box. Yeah. Where it says view.
Click on view. What does it say? There should be 3 options there for you. You're muted, so hold your bar down. Hold your space bar down. Okay, so you see view, there should be 3 options there.
Yep.
Okay, I think it's Tanya, which is the one she should click?
Okay, so what you want to do is you want to click side by side gallery.
Okay.
And all of the images should move to the right-hand side of your screen. Is that correct?
Except for Jerry. He's
Okay,
not
so
here.
that, yeah.
So you
Go
should be
ahead.
able to move, if you go to the border between the pictures of us and the slideshow, you should be able to move the slideshow over so that you get a double row of boxes of people.
Okay. Yep.
There you go. Okay, so you can see everybody now. Great.
Yeah.
Super. Okay, and that would apply to everybody. So I have 10 pictures on my screen plus the slideshow, so I can see Sherry and Anita and yourself and Jerry and some of the staff. Okay, thank you, colleagues. We'll move on. I think we're still on the capital budget lane.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we're just finishing up that tab, and thank you for that discussion in the Direction Council. This graphic shows where the investments are being made in 2021, and if you'll see on the left-hand side of that slide, the various brown squares. Majority of our investments are definitely in roads equipment, roadside light, street lights, storm sewer, hard infrastructure. And then on the right-hand side, the blue, you'll see good investments there in the facilities and in technology as well. So just a graphic to show where our capital dollars are being spent this year. Just going to move on from capital to reserves, unless there's a question.
Oh, looks good. Let's go to reserves.
Okay, over to reserves. So yeah, we've reviewed assessment, which yields taxes. We've reviewed our grant revenue, our capital investment. So reserves are another, of course, key funding source for capital. And they're also an area where we set aside funds for future years through our operational transfers. And this chart is familiar to council. I update it every year. Provides an overview of the information that's included in the tab in the budget binder. 3 general areas for reserves: working funds, specific reserves, and then deferred revenues, also referred to as reserve funds. Our total estimate by year's end 2021 is a little over $13 million. By far, our specific reserves is the largest component of that. We are seeing a drawdown a bit in our working funds this year proposed. The specific reserve includes such reserves as fire equipment, road construction, roads equipment, and facilities. So those are kind of the larger ones, but it also sets aside specific funding for other areas that we have found over the years you need to have a bit of money set aside because it can really hurt your year end. And so some of those other reserves: insurance contingency, winter control contingency, And of course, with the election reserve, we set aside a bit every year so that when we have the election every 4 years, the additional expense of having an election isn't a blip. We basically just pull money from reserve to pay for that. So reserves allow us to plan, and they essentially take the peaks and valleys out of the tax levy to make any of these purchases that we're talking about. And it gets back to one of our goals we've always looked at is slow, stable, steady growth in the township. So quite simply, it's good. It's good if the reserves are sufficient to provide a solid and stable source of funding. I am still closing out the 2020 numbers, but as proposed, we will be drawing down the reserves. I'd like to note, though, that some of the reserves that we're actually drawing on this year were actually funds set aside for UMP last year. So we took those funds from UMP, set it aside in reserve, and then we're drawing out of those reserves this year. And probably the best example, the one that provides the clearest picture of that is with respect to streetlights. So we set aside a little over $138,000 last year for our LED streetlight project in the downtown core, and this year we're pulling that money out. And so we would expect the order would go in for those in around February, and Scott would be working on an RFP for installation later this year. So you'll see a kind of a refresh of the old green lights into black LED lights in that area. And that's of course one of our initiatives with Trail Town. So that's all I was going to talk about on the reserves.
I have a question here. One of the issues that is discussed, it was brought forward by Performance Consulting, and that's the balance in our building building fee reserve, which I think is getting pretty close to $900,000. If I understand, there's a statutory requirement that that reserve needs to only be high enough to deal with that particular component. I know our consultants suggested that we were getting to a point where that was getting to a level higher than what it needed to be. I believe we end up contributing it to it every year, at least have for as long as I can remember that we've been doing that. And so at some point in time, I think it doesn't need to be today, because it is what it is right now. We're going to need to have a discussion about how large we want that reserve to be. We've dealt with it somewhat as a council because we've frozen those fees to try to reflect that. But I just it's something that was pointed out to us through an external review, and I think it's something that we really need to take a look at. Donna, go ahead.
Yes, just a comment I made earlier that I thought that the deficit at the Lakefield Smith Arena was more than Ennismore, and I see on this chart here now that it's not. So I don't know. I must have had a dream. Sorry about that.
Well, no, when you look at the breakout, I think it does show that they're contributing more to the Smith Lakefield than they are to Ennismore.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I think that both councillors are correct. In 2020, the deficit in Lakefield Smith Community Center was higher. In 2021, it's lower. So there's definitely two matters at play there. So as the mayor pointed out, the UMP funding would wipe those out in 2021, and definitely the Lakefield Smith was higher at that point in time. Most of that goes back to reduced revenues. In Ennismore, definitely the savings in hydro was a big impact there. And we have to remember that the revenues also take into account at the start of the year. So January, February last year were very strong in Ennismore. So hopefully that will clarify a bit.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Anything else on reserves? Okay, let's move on.
Okay. On to impacts. And this tab takes all of the influences and impacts throughout the budget, condenses it down into a few pages. And as noted by some councillors, it's really where the meat and potatoes of the budget comes together. And if you, for most, it reflects the direction already provided by council in many areas, or expenditures that basically flow out of council direction. So before we get on to the individual impacts, just an area where our gross expenditures are in 2021, pie chart just to illustrate that. Of course, a high priority on infrastructure, roads, stormwater, high priority on protection, and protection on this slide is gross expenditures, and it includes policing, fire service, building, planning, bylaw enforcement. And then the next largest slide would be general government, and that captures anything to do with our legislative, administrative, or financial work of the township. Switching from gross expenditures over to net funding from taxation. This chart shows where the tax levy and the area rates are spent, and this is one of the few spots where we actually put tax levy and both area rates together, because the area rates are, of course, for policing are only going to be felt in whatever ward that you're living in the township, but in this instance, it's pulled together. Once again, these same high priority areas where council has provided direction to spend tax dollars. The other areas, of course, have the ability to charge user fees, so say landfill, arena, sports facilities, those types of things. On this chart, the blue is where we were last year with our net levy, and then the yellow are the areas where the tax levy is going up. So in general government, ECDEV, majority of that is going to be for our multimedia and our technology impacts ongoing. And then in the protection area, fire, bylaw enforcement, and development approvals. And as well outline a little bit, our actual police area rate levies are coming down a little bit, but still overall that area goes up. No change in public works and waste because of some of those areas I outlined before about user charges. And then just a small sliver in recreation and culture to reflect increase in tax levy support at the arenas and some budgetary changes at the library with respect to wages. The actual tax levy increase then in terms of dollars and cents. All of this information is outlined in more detail in the impacts tab of the binder, and we'll go through each high-level area. And so in that area, you see that there are global impacts that are faced across the township. And we talked about this in December. Things like wage increases, insurance increases, things like that are felt across the municipality.
Wayne, can you just hold on a second? I think Sherry wanted a clarification.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, through you. I'm just looking at page 3 of our binder, and it has the 200,300 and then a breakdown of it. And 105,000 of that was because of the organizational changes. And it was for the positions of full-time positions for the bylaw enforcement and development approval support. And as Andy referred to using reserves out of the building fund, I thought that was one of the recommendations that the consultants had made, that it come out of the reserves. It would have made a difference to the bottom line of what our tax increase is if we'd done that. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. I did read that in the consultant's report. It definitely comes down to how the job actually ends up being scored out and what the majority of the work is that they're going to do. And so in the what's being outlined in this budget and what we know now is the development approvals technician position would be in Department 50, and the majority of the work would be completing planning matters. And so because of that, it needs to be funded through either planning fees or taxation or a drawdown on accumulated revenue. So we can't use that reserve to offset other expenses in other areas. Likewise, the bylaw enforcement position would be in Department 13, but it would be funded through taxation and not through the building inspection fees. I think that it's safe to say that as both of those positions move forward, and particularly the development approvals technician, as they move forward and as they become more familiar with the planning function and possibly support the planning function, we may be able to change the allocation there so that some of those costs may be able to be shared from the reserve or from building fees. And I think I've talked with Rob about that a little bit. At this point in time, we're taking a kind of a really cautious approach to see how that's going to work. But there may be some support there that can be provided by the building inspection fees or by the reserve. But that's kind of, we need to wait and see what type of individual we get on site and then what support will actually be provided there. So I would say as a straightforward comment, I can't use those reserves to offset those costs, but down the road, we may see if that individual has the skill set Rob requires in the building department that we can change the mix and how that job is shared. And Rob, I'm not sure if you have any comments that you'd like to add on that or not.
No, I think you covered it quite well. I think the limit here, the headwind is the language in the Building Code Act, very prescriptive, and it limits what we can use the funds that we generate from building permits for, right? So we have to be able to rationalize that they're being spent on bona fide expenditures related to delivering the building permit function, right?
Okay, so based on that and following up from what Sherry said, so let's assume this new position starts their job middle of March. Is it not fair to track that individual's activities for the balance of the year? Now, we don't know what it's going to look like, but track it for the balance of the year so that at the end of the year, if you were to see that 8% of that individual's time ended up dealing with building issues, could be doing some work at the counter, it could be doing something else, that at the end of the year, you would be able to draw 8% of that person's salary out of that reserve and off off the levy charge. Is that fair to say that we can track that person's actual activities over the 9 months, and that portion that was building and planning type could be sourced from the reserve?
Okay, so yeah, I think it's fair to say that we try to estimate those types of things kind of at the budget stage. There's certainly allocations to the building department for staff. Part of Jeanette's wage is paid for through the building department, and part of obviously my wage is as well. So yeah, so we'll take so the idea is, at the beginning of the year, where we're at today, we make those allocations and they're adjusted the following year if we think that that the person maybe worked more or less in that particular department. So yeah, so I guess it's a moving target, and as I said, typically it's done at this point in time, and it would be done again in 2022, and maybe that's certainly where we would.
Fair enough, Rob. Yeah, I get what you're saying. So let's track that person's actual time this year. And then when we set the budget in 2022, if we found that the person is actually doing 10% building, I'm just taking that number out of the air, that when we do 2022, that person will be sourced 90% from levy and 10% from reserve. Is that a fair way to do it?
It absolutely is, yes.
Okay, so if we could note somewhere that one of the things that we discuss when we're doing the 2022 budget is the split on the new person's workload, so that we could make a determination if some of that salary can be sourced out of the building reserve. Everybody comfortable with that? Anita?
are we going to discuss that a little bit more? Or I do have another question with regards to impacts, not necessarily the building department.
Okay, so we're finished with the building departments, and so Anita has an additional question on those impacts. Go ahead, Anita.
So this is on page 2 of the impacts tab with regards to economic development at 603,000 for total expenditures. Can somebody break that out where the $603,000 is being directed to? I understand probably staffing, but I'm just curious what else is on that under that 603,000.
Dean?
Sure. So I'd look to the summary tab for that, and specific to Department 7. This year, definitely the expenses are higher than typical because of the work being done for Trailtown, and a chunk of that, of course, is being funded by reserve. It came in last year from UMP, so this year it's coming in from Trailtown and from the RED funding. So those downtown amenities to complement the LED streetlights, that's being captured in that department. That's about $165,000. We also increased the community improvement plan, and so we'll be talking about that in a few slides. So as per council direction there, we doubled that amount this year. We're drawing that out of reserves as well. And yes, then there is salaries and benefits in there, about $150,000. And of course, we're looking at our multimedia program there as well. So I would draw your attention to Department 7 and the review of the narrative and the details there.
Is that good, Anita? Or okay. Other questions on that slide that we have up there? Because that's basically what's driving our levy increase for this year. Jerry.
Thank you. Through you, just wanted to mention that the in the economic development, which Anita mentioned, the ongoing support for multimedia is ongoing support for our businesses. Thank you.
Okay, Anita. Yes, go ahead.
We probably will touch on the multimedia a bit later in the presentation. If not, I want to just add that I think it's a great idea. I think it's a wonderful program. Has done a really good job.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And it's now going to be built into our levy, so it's there for us to do every year. So that's, I think, makes good. It's a good way to support our community. Okay, any other questions on that slide? I don't see any, Lane. So that is what's driving the 2.66 is what's right there. And then I think you've got. I think you may have want to discuss some details on those, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so definitely that outlines it. As you can see, that some of those global impacts that we talked about before, insurance, they're kind of mitigated in different areas. We talked about Department 13 helping to mitigate some of the expenses, but that is definitely the tax impact that we're looking at this year. In recent years, council has also asked that I take a look at what things that were not presented in the budget to basically get to that 2.66%. And to essentially, to be really crass, what was cut to get to the proposed 2.66%. So I won't get back on my soapbox with respect to percentages and the fact that we need hard tax dollars to pay things, but it is a lot different here than it is in the county, the city of Toronto. But in any event, these items were not included in the budget this year. The fleet, so if we looked overall at what our goal for the fleet would be in terms of a reserve contribution, we were unable to put a little over $52,000 of additional funding aside. I've mentioned that over the last few years, and that down the road, we are going to have to come to grips with our equipment charges, our replacement schedule for the same equipment, and just the whole idea of do we own, do we rent, those types of things. So the first two areas are with respect to that, either reserve contribution or the increase in the hourly charge. And definitely Rick did a little bit of work this year, reached out to some of the local contractors to see how they do their charge outs. And we have to spend a little bit more time on that when we all have a little bit more time just to follow that through. So as we charge out our equipment at a higher rate, well, then those expenses are higher throughout the budget as well. Our community transportation program, our pilot, is moving ahead, and as we do that, we need to look down the road to when that grant is not available. And so, as is typical in our township, we try to forecast that and start to set aside some money from taxation into a specific reserve. And so we were unable to, unfortunately, set that tax support aside this year as well. So that's about $80,000. We have at the arenas with our ice plants, all the floor of the arenas, equipment that's very specific to ice and what we do in that facility, as opposed to the facility itself, the roof, the walls, those types of things. We don't really have a specific reserve for that, and quite often when we have, say, a compressor that we need to replace, desiccant unit, things like that, we either rely on UMP or we rely on the general government reserve or contingency reserve. And so really we should start setting money aside specific to those plants and the equipment that are there, and that's just good asset management, good long-term planning. Of course, we have our arenas that we had the remaining deficits that we're funding. We need to take a look at those systemic deficits and kind of get a grasp on them. We've been fortunate that UMP has continued on year after year. And this year we're not only taking care of the UMP, we're using UMP to take care of the deficits from 2020. We budgeted to take money out of reserves to clear the existing deficit, but we need to really start looking at the tax levy there. Generally, and it's hard to really put together a solid figure on this, but I would say a net figure is just median, and essentially me and Janice are me later on going through the budget and kind of fine tuning those estimates, trying to just take a look at something and say, well, that, that's a good figure, but really, if you look at the last 2 years of history, that's maybe $500 too high, that's $1,000 too high, that type of thing. This year we used some of the OSEEF grant to pay for an ongoing annual expense. It is the first year that we have the annual expense, but this is for our GIS program that ties in with asset management. So because it is our first year, I thought it was okay to use the OSEEF grant for that, but eventually we'll have to incorporate that into a tax levy as well. And then we are drawing down our working funds this year based on the proposal by about $140,000. So basically using that accumulated revenue where it seems fit. It's not we're not stepping away from our goals and our principles there with respect to that. If it's a one-time or a phase-in, then we're using it. But once again, that's a significant amount of money. So when you look at $556,000, and I don't recall the slide back when we were at $75,000 is a 1% tax increase, you can see that there are a number of things that we did have to take out of the budget or not put in.
Thank you for outlining that, Lane. Just Don, I'll get to you in just a second. So every year it's a balance between what we bring on in that particular year and what we don't. So there are things that we're bringing on this year that we've talked about that we won't have to bring on next year. And hopefully we'll leave some room for some of these things. So we talked about the marketing program in economic development. We're going to bring it onto the levy this year, and so we won't need to address that. The staffing positions, we're taking on the lion's share of that impact this year, so there's going to be a lower impact next year. The technology, the increases in technology licenses we're taking on this year, so we won't have to take them on next year. So it's a bit of a balancing act. You've made some recommendations of what we should take on this year, and as we do that, hopefully next year we'll have some room to take on part of this other list. I'm really hoping that we don't face that kind of insurance premium increase again next year, but who knows? We might. But it's a real balancing act, and I appreciate your expertise in providing recommendations to council. Donna, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. Through you to Lane, the community transportation tax support. another year when and if we have to do that, would Curve Lake First Nations be helping with that? Because, or is that just our portion? Because they will be benefiting from the transportation program as well.
That the amount that I'm talking about here is definitely just our share. I maybe could let Angie weigh in a little bit just on the cost sharing with other partners, but this was just specific to our share. But Angie, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything there.
Yes, thank you. So I can confirm, Donna, that we would, at the end of the pilot, want to work with all of our partners, not just Curve Lake First Nation. There's some other partners such as Trent University and potentially Sir Sanford Fleming that we would want to look to provide further support to the operations.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I'll ask you to keep going there, Lane.
Okay, moving on then to the summary by the department, and let's go through the highlights and kind of then move on to the next steps. I have definitely shortened this section of the presentation this year considerably. Council has had the package, of course, for a week, and they've had the time to review and clarify. But I'll review the highlights as it relates to the impacts that we just went through. And then, of course, as with every section, there'll be a chance at the end to ask any additional questions that could come up. So in the general government area, we have had a large focus there on technology, and so we'll be focused on that again this year in terms of phase 2 of our program. Really, this is, as a finance person, this is really where I want to see us maximize our new system. So yes, we implemented them last year, we hit our targets, but as we work through the new system, we need to continue to refine, ask the tough questions of our supplier and really make it perform. Maximizing use of our virtual town hall that was launched late in December. That's a key focus for us, and using the municipal app to access that. I really can't say enough good things about the work the staff did in the environment that we're in terms of implementing the program. Staff have rolled out some great promotional materials. The insert in the recent tax billing is second to none. Some of this type of promotional material, I just think back to 15 years ago in municipal government, we would have never seen the quality that we're putting out today. And the support through the social media as well. Our virtual town hall, which is really coming through from council's desire to see more of a municipal face out in the internet, really, and providing different options for our ratepayers to access information. Virtual town hall is up and running now. It is early days. You know, we just launched soft launching in December. I don't know the recent figures, but I can tell you that our staff, and specifically our technology coordinator, is tracking all new signups and things like that. So last I looked, I think we're over 100 folks that have signed up already. We've been asked actually to provide a presentation on virtual town hall to our peers and actually outline how we've used the modernization funds. And so Erica and the tech team is doing some work on that, and we're contacted by some of our colleagues at Municipal Affairs, and they would be looking at other peer municipalities, smaller and mid-sized municipalities, and so we'll be rolling that out at some point here in February. Of course, with technology, though, there is increased operational costs, and so as we employ more technology, then we have more support costs that would go along with that technology. And in particular, when we go online, there are annual software support costs and service fee charges. And so we used Moneris as our online gateway service. So there are startup costs, but there are also ongoing monthly charges for settlement fees, transaction fees, and things like that. So as Mayor Mitchell outlined, we have felt that impact in this year's budget. The majority of it is in there, I would say. But over time, we do expect those costs will go up because we want to encourage more people to use the online service. So that is something that we'll keep a close eye on and likely report on in the next few years as we move forward. But as I say, we're keeping great statistics on that, so we can report out on that to council. Oh, there may be a question there, Mitchell, from Councillor Locke.
Sorry, Anita, I missed you there. Go ahead.
That's okay. I sort of was a little bit slow getting to it. As an example, so right now we're recording live on YouTube. Are we able to see how many people are actually logged on and watching, whether it's a council meeting or whether it's this budget meeting or other sorts of things, or is that information, does it show up on YouTube?
Yeah, I do know that Angie's team keeps a close eye on some of that. I am not familiar with how that works, so I would turn that over to Angie to definitely talk about the work that Tanya and Megan are doing in that regard.
Actually, Tanya might be a better one to respond to that.
Sure, yeah, I can do that. We do, when we are hosting a meeting live, it does show us how many people are watching. So right now at this meeting, we have 4 people watching the YouTube meeting live, but we don't know who. So people just land on our channel. We don't have any indication of where those IPs are coming from. But right now there are 4, and that changes, and you can view that post meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that I heard Tanya say 4. I think she must have dropped a couple zeros because I'm sure that there's probably like 400 people watching this live budget presentation. But
sorry, Lane, I meant to say 4,000. My bad.
It is riveting, Lane. It is riveting.
I will say, just hopefully to make Lane feel a little bit better, that although there's 4 people now, if you go to the YouTube channel in 3 days, you might see that number's up to 50 or 100 or whatever, right? So once people do go back and monitor the channel and view meetings post live production.
And if I can just add, I think if there's actually 4 people watching our YouTube channel right now, that's probably more than we've had in the gallery most times when we're doing budget.
Right, true. Okay, motor on.
Okay, economic and community development. So some points here and reasons why for our tax levy increase would be there. Of course, we've had some staff resource to work with our community members for the last number of years, but not a lot of additional funding to support outreach initiatives. I think Ange and her team has did a great job at accessing other funds, and the RED program is a good example of that. So when we have that other funding source there, we have our share to partner and move things forward. But in 2020, we saw great success in terms of, I guess, elevating the profile of the township, and not just the township proper, but really Sullivan in general, and promoting the good work that's being done in the business community. So using council's direction on the program from last year, it's proposed that we would implement a new multimedia funding package that would be built into our base budget this year. So it's a little over $50,000. It allows us to reach out to various forms of media and support it through social media. So it is truly a multimedia marketing package. Also, as I outlined before, council provided direction to increase the CIP contribution available this year by doubling it. And then if it is required, we would pull those funds from reserve. So that's been built into the budget based on that council direction as well. And then as council will recall, we have our financial incentives increase, which we phased in over 4 years. So every year of this council term, we've added an additional $6,250. So that's in there as well. So seeing good investment this year in economic and community development. Moving on to the fire service. The majority of our declining fire revenues here relates to the MVA fees. We have chatted about this at council several times. When Gordon and I and Janice sit down and go through the budget, we typically look at those revenues and try to estimate them over the last number of years and average. And we are seeing just a general decline. So I would say we're at a point here now where they have declined enough over the last decade where we need to actually just provide some more tax support. So that's part of the increase there. There have indeed been kind of ebbs and flows, but there are write-offs of these billings that impact the revenues, but this is the year to increase some tax support. Of course, the call volumes remain high, which means our wage figures remain high in that department. We're fortunate that we do have some new recruits coming in this year, so there'll be some additional costs there, but those costs we are funding through reserve. So we don't have like a blip in our tax levy just this year because of some new recruits. They're being funded through our contingency reserve. We do have automatic aid costs, which are increasing in that area, specifically with the city automatic aid. So folks down in that area, and insurance has definitely hit the fire department this year as well. And really just because they don't have those user fees to be able to offset. So those are some of the costs. There may be some questions on that. I just have one further comment, but I think Councillor Valentine may have.
Yep. Go ahead, Donna.
Yes, thank you very much. Through you. This isn't related to anything that you've mentioned, Lane, but I've heard that the members of our fire department, our volunteer firefighters, are going to, I'm not sure exactly when, but be getting the COVID vaccine. And one question that was asked of me, well, what about their family members? And I'm not sure if that's being talked about at a staff level or if Gord's here, if he has any insights into that.
Morning all. Donna, I haven't heard anything yet. Even just this week, the county coordinator was just asking for our firefighter numbers. There was nothing about family members or anything at this point. So as you know, reading the mail, we thought maybe the end of March, but with who knows when it's going to happen for anybody as far as that goes. So yeah, not much discussion, Donna, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Gordon.
Anything else in the fire department?
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add to that answer a little bit.
Sure.
So just in terms of how the vaccine rollout is happening, that's really being governed by the province, and they're working with public health. So in terms of how that will be rolled out to firefighters and beyond that to the general population really isn't something that we will have a lot of control over. It's being rolled out through public health.
Thank you, Janice. Anything else in the fire department? Not seeing any? Okay, keep going, Lane.
Okay, and sure. And just so as we work through, just a point there, as we work through the service delivery review for the fire department, reports will be coming back to council at some point for direction there as well in different areas. And I think we'll see that implementation take place maybe later this year and into 2021. It'll have an impact on future years as well. So that's something that definitely Gordon will be turning his mind to throughout 2020 in terms of effort. Over to the building department, and I say here building department is Department 13. It includes a lot of different cost centers or different functions that take place in there. In this area in particular, we don't, there's no CPI increase proposed as per recommended and the direction we've received. So there's no CPI increase on permit fees. The service delivery review the recommendations are being implemented. Rob continues to refer to those. And of course, we just had our dashboard meeting earlier today with council. But the area that we're seeing the impact on taxation here is with respect to our bylaw enforcement officer. This is definitely in Robert's area of responsibility as well. I'm hoping to see with a new bylaw enforcement officer on site that it will provide some relief to Rob and the department generally. We've included about 6 months worth of phase-in for this new position. And the phase-in impact here is funded through taxation.
Sherry, you had a comment on that? And then Anita and then Donna.
This is to do with the electric vehicle that we're not making a decision on now, but in the worksheets at the back of the budget, it mentions on page 16 that the PHEV had repairs and maintenance of $2,555. That's not true, right? Okay.
No, thanks very much for bringing that forward. Yeah, this is just really a matter of how I take care of the general ledger. I don't like to have a lot of excess GL accounts sitting around. So in Rob's department, he has 2 vehicles. And as we replace a vehicle, we just update the description for that general ledger. So that's essentially BDO 1, Building Department Vehicle 1. And so the majority of those expenses, probably about $2,300 worth, were for the old half ton that was in there. So Rob's practice has been over the years is before that half ton gets handed off to Parks and Recreation, The team here at our mechanics go through it, and those costs would include some repairs to air conditioner and full brake job on that vehicle. So the actual cost of the electric vehicle included in that department is less than $100. It was to do with some additional parts we needed for a charging station. And I think we've only actually got one oil change completed on that vehicle at this point in time. And I don't even think we received the bill for that yet. I think it was just at the end of the year. So definitely those costs are for the old gas-powered half ton.
Thank you. Anita and then Donna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is with regards to the hiring of bylaw enforcement. Would this be over and above the use of Kawartha Guard, or would it replace Kawartha Guard?
I'll definitely get Rob to weigh in on that, and I think that there's some information that he could draw on from our organizational report to council. I do know that the budget still includes a component for Kawartha Guard, but I'll just let Rob answer that question.
All right, yeah, thank you, Lane. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, essentially, I think our reliance on Kawartha Guard will be reduced, but there will still be instances. Kawartha Guard's been doing quite a bit of work over this winter season, addressing overnight parking issues. So, off-hour stuff and some other items I think would still be managed by Kawartha Guard.
Okay, so Donna?
Yes, my question was the same as Anita's, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's the question. So keep going, Rob. I mean, Lane.
Okay, moving on to the next major increases with respect to tax levy. We've got a little bit there for support of the library and the arenas, but the next one would be, or the impact is the planning department. Once again, no CPI increase in planning fees for 2021 are proposed or built into the budget. The service delivery review there, of course, those recommendations are being implemented. And we're in the midst of hiring a development approvals technician. The budget includes roughly a 10-month impact in the budget. Also included in that department are impacts of the new planning software. And so any implementation fees or initial sign-up fees or service fees are paid for either by grant or by reserve, but then there will be annual costs, and really in the form of a monthly service charge that will come forward. So that's included there as well, and that would be funded by rates and taxation. So those are the highlights of the summary tab, Council. Definitely specific to how some of those projects materialize in a taxation impact, but the summary tab in itself is good work. It shows what the different departments are doing. I want to once again recognize the department heads for the work which they've put into that tab in particular, and specifically Angie and Janice for their work on weaving together the budget narratives. I really like the way that we marry up the words and the numbers to explain our plans. It essentially tells a story of where we are investing time and effort and finances and so on. So just before I move on, are there any other questions on the summary tab?
Anita.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if you're going to be getting into it, and I put my sticky note on my wrong page, but I have. So with regards to the boat slips, I know that there's they're all spoken for, and there's a waiting list, and I don't know if you're going to cover that the rec department going forward, but if not, I'm just curious: do we have the opportunity or the availability to maybe put in more boat slips at some location on this side of the river, so the east side of the river? I know there's a water intake for the treatment plant, but I'm just wondering, because the boat slips seem to be generating a good amount of revenue, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to do some more.
Yeah, we definitely treat the marina like an enterprise all on its own. So we ensure that the expenses that are coming into the arena or the marina, are offset by the revenues that are being charged. And we are increasing fees this year. I think we maybe fell behind a little bit in terms of our market rates and what we're charging. And that area of the marina expansion is definitely something that's been identified in our study, and I think it's coming up for review. I just can't say exactly when that is, but Mike, if Mike's still on the line, he can maybe speak to the approach that we'll be taking when we look at the marina and any expansion down the road.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. There is definitely some work that needs to be done. It was identified obviously in the SDR and has been in several other studies and plans. We do have a decent waiting list. It's certainly not in the hundreds like I've heard, but we have a decent waiting list. We have a very good return rate. We will continue to look at both sides of the river. There's certainly agreements and promises that were made about what would happen on both sides. Hague looks like it has a little bit of room, but we met with a couple local suppliers to look at the costs of installing and constructing new docks, and that would certainly be part of looking at the ROI on that. Obviously, 2021 is going to be very busy with the campground review in Lakefield, and I think it's wise that we get through that and look at all of the aspects of it, and then look probably 2022 to do a really good review and look at where we can add them, where it makes sense for our return on investment, because there will have to be an investment. Similar to the boardwalk and the Lakefield Trail Stewardship Group looking at investing some money. They're both around 20 years old at the marina and with some of the docks that we have out there. So there's going to have to be an investment. I think we should do it as a wholesome project.
Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, it's through you to Mike. Mike, when they do the campground review, and depending on the recommendations that they come up with, could some of that, I know it's not on Anita's side of the river, but could somebody be looking at the water access points along the campground and have that as one of the recommendations to potentially use for boat slips?
Well, again, through you, Mr. Mayor, there are docks in there right now. It's a very environmentally sensitive area, so we really have to be very careful with what we do. But there are some docks in there right now that are managed by the campground. So there is a water access that is used by that group. Again, we would have to be with the Imagining a Marsh group, with Orca right there, and with the wetlands and marshlands. We'd have to be very, very careful with what we do in there. That was certainly one of the reasons why all of the shoreside sites were taken away many years ago, is the impact that they can have directly on that water source. So we'd have to be very careful, but yes, we have to look at the whole project. We have to look at the whole property.
Okay, so they will be looking at, I hate to say it, but let's say we don't continue the campground operation, the area where those docks are now could be used by the township, potentially?
Potentially, certainly. It wouldn't be. We'll have to see what comes up from the full utilization review and study, but certainly expansion would not be a wise thing there. It would be, but there are, I believe, 25 docks there right now, or 25 slips in there right now. So there is potential to continue that operation.
So that will be looked at then, the shoreline part of it.
Absolutely. Yep. Everything will be reviewed, but it took a number of years and even decades to restore that shoreline and naturalize it. So so that or by removing the sites, so everything is going to get looked at. But I don't think anything new in the naturalized shoreline would be would be a recommendation. But again, I don't know that for certain. There are slips there right now.
Okay, I didn't expect new ones, but like I said, if it was ever decided to discontinue the campground, we might have an opportunity for more slips, is really all my point.
Yes, and that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I don't see any, Wayne.
I've got one, Andy. I don't think you can see me here.
Now you come back on right as soon as you said something. Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, sir. This is through you to Lane, just regarding the planning, Department 50, the last page. I understand that you're moving $5,000, shuffling it around from the within the consulting service and legal. However, your language in there, I don't know whether we need a closed meeting coming up, but it says reflect anticipated expenditures in 2021, referring to upping our legal budget. That kind of concerns me.
Lee?
No, I think what that would maybe refer to more is, as council is aware, we have switched law firms, and so maybe some of those expenses are a bit higher in terms of on an hourly basis or on a project basis.
Thank you.
Okay. I now have everybody on my screen. I don't see any other questions. Lane?
Okay, so we'll move on. Everything we've talked about pretty much so far has been municipal tax levy and the impact on that. So we'll just step aside from that a bit and look at our area rates and our ORCA levy. ORCA has, the ORCA Board of Directors has adopted their 2021 budget. We have received the billing for that for this year. The impacts of the levy are outlined on the slide. And overall, the levy is down this year. Primarily, I think it reflects the completion of the Cabin Dam project. And then in terms of how the rest of the levy is actually shared based on assessment and different things, the share to Selwyn is up. So even though the tax rate is very small, we do apply it on the tax bill as a separate rate, so it's transparent to the ratepayers. And of course, because we don't have any direct control over it, but it's the levy's up just marginally this year, a little over $3,200. Moving over to police area rates, the OPP costs, and specific, of course, to the rural wards. Council will recall that adjustments for prior years, they always come in 2 budget years behind. So we have received now the adjustment for 2019. We're seeing an increase in the costs that we paid in 2019 by about $11,800. Now, this is the second year where Selwyn has experienced an increase after really years of credits. But despite this increase, we have followed past practice, and we've ensured that the area rate matches the OPP contract amount. So when we do that, we see that we actually have an area rate decrease of 1% in 2021. We look at policing costs in Lakefield. Of course, we're operating now under a contract relationship there. Our schedule in that contract, the 2021 schedule cost is up about 2%, a little over $11,000. There have been no additional chargebacks for anything done in 2020. So while the contract is going up, we have actually managed to put aside sufficient contingency dollars there for that contract. So we're proposing that we follow the same practice as the OPP this year and really have that area rate match the contract amount, which we have adjusted for a small contingency. So we're seeing a levy decrease there as well. And the levy decrease there is 2.91%. So that's a really quick overview of ORCA and the police rates and that budget. So we've talked about the municipal rate and these last 3 rates, and so now we move on to the impact on the typical homeowner. Of course, no reassessment this year. no change in the CVA of the typical homeowner. So the typical homeowner, we're looking at a CVA of a little over $314,000. And when we look at this impact, we're looking at the impact of the municipal and the police only. This doesn't include Orca. We would still not receive the counties for some time. And as I mentioned, the education rate isn't changing this year. I would expect that later in the first quarter, I should be able to report back to council on the overall increase of the typical homeowner. But we'll see that our municipal increase, when you break it down to the typical homeowner, it's an increase of less than 3%, and it's $20.39. The OPP police rate, because it went down, that translate to a decrease there. And overall, the municipal for the rural ward would go up 1.84%, a little over or a little less than $17, so $16.71. Looking to the village, same homeowner, only lives in the village now. Municipal increase is exactly the same. But here we're seeing quite a bit larger decrease in that police area rate. Essentially because the policing rate for the smaller number of households is quite a bit bigger share of their tax bill. So when we see that decrease, we actually see an overall decrease to the municipal homeowner of about 0.64% over the 2020 value, and so a reduction of $7.82.
Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So does those two previous slides, does that equate to the 2.66% increase that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, so both of those slides, they take into account the 2.66% increase in net levy. And then depending on what ward you're in, it also takes into account the decrease in the policing area rate. So yeah, everything that's presented so far today, that's the impact of it to the typical homeowner.
Sherry?
Thank you, through you. So once this has been approved, are you going to put up on the website, like how are you going to show it on the website? I think it's confusing for a lot of homeowners.
Well, we've tried, I can say in Selwyn, we've tried to be consistent with how we present our numbers. Even in a reassessment year, we always focus on the net tax levy. That's the only thing that we have care and control over. We enter it with the same set of principles that if there is new growth, we will use that new growth first before we look at any increases in the budget. We've been consistent in our forms and how we lay that out. In terms of our tax insert and the distribution of taxation, we've been consistent with that for years. I know I've got in my office 4 years worth right now, and they all look very similar. We always increase the typical homeowner cost if there's a CVA change, so very transparent that way. But definitely the presentation of that can get a little muddied when you have different municipalities and different jurisdictions reporting on it in a different way. And so granted, I take that under advisement for sure. We're always looking at new ways that we can present, be a little bit more informative and a little bit more transparent. But what we've tried to do is be consistent in our approach and not change on an annual basis. And hopefully with that approach, then ratepayers get used to it and they get to see how we're reporting our data.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so where are we at, Lane?
Well, that really concludes the PowerPoint presentation and my overview of the budget document. Really, the management team is available online for any additional inquiries or any further questions, but I wanted to just thank council for their attention, and Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so you're going to leave that screen up there. That's the recommendations that are before us, that the report of the manager of financial services entitled taxation draft be received for information, and that based on that discussion, that Lane be directed to prepare a report for presentation to council, which would be the actual adoption of the budget that would happen in February. Sherry. Sherry moves, Anita seconds. Okay. Any further discussion? Donna?
Yes, I think it was, not sure when it was, a previous council meeting that I'm pretty sure that we approved not refurbishing our 3 generators at treatment plants, but buying new. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly, Lane?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, all 3 of those generators were actually at our water and sewer facilities. So council will see those come forward in the water and sewer budget when we bring it forward later this year.
So will that impact our taxes? Will there be an increase? Are we accounted for that somehow, that expense?
Yeah, no, those expenses will be paid for totally from the water and wastewater reserves that we have in the respective wards. So no impact on taxation whatsoever. It'll be the Lakefield Water and Sewer reserves or the Woodland Acres reserve that we pay for those. And Adam is working on an RFP right now, and that will be going out shortly.
So you're confident that, to me, those generators will be very costly, but we do have significant reserves to cover those?
We definitely have sufficient reserves in water and sewer for those, and we would in no way cross-subsidize using tax dollars or tax reserves for the water and sewer departments.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a seconder. I'm going to call a vote. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Okay, thank you, colleagues. I'm just seeing what else we have here. So we have no consent items. We have no petitions. We have no portfolio updates. We have no new or unfinished business.
We have another
Anita's got her hand up. Go ahead. Anita?
We have the campground study report.
Oh, I'm looking on the agenda. Where is that? Oh, item number B. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Thank you for picking that up. That would go over to Mike. I guess you're going to make a report on that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I won't go through the whole report, but we have met with as per the SDR, we prepared a document to address doing a campground utilization study in 2021. The council will remember that there was direction to look at schedule or sections 2.02 of the campground operators and let them know that we would be not renewing beyond a 2-year window. So up until the spring of 2023, we have an operator, and in that 2-year window, it was decided that we would do the utilization study. We have spoken to the Monteith Brown, the consultant that did the recreation service plan back in 2012 and then again in 2017 when they did the updated version, and then most recently last year did the service delivery review. They are available and have presented a quote that would be within the budget. So we are looking at recommending sole sourcing them and getting them started immediately on engaging staff, stakeholders, community groups, council, in doing a fulsome review, focusing on the 5 possible or the 5 recommendations or potential uses, and working through that with those the groups that have been mentioned, and then narrowing it down to the most viable, and then doing a even more intense comprehensive look at those options through kind of a SWOT format where we would be looking at all the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that would be presented by each and every one of the options.
Okay. Questions to Mike about that? Okay. Need a motion then. Nita will move. Donna will second. Any further questions? No? All in favor? Carried. Okay. So now we got through that. So now all of those things that I read before, there are no consent items, no petitions, no portfolio updates, no other business. And we have a bylaw. So we just need to do a confirming bylaw. Is that it?
That's correct.
Okay. Moved by Sherry, seconded by Anita. All those in favor. And Jerry is moving adjournment, seconded by Donna. All in favor. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to staff. That was a very great, good presentation. A lot of hard work put into that. So very, very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
And colleagues, we see you soon. Bye-bye.